Hello, everyone. I don't know whether we're yet broadcasting. Hello. Hi, Chad.
Hello. I think we have a few more moments, but
we do. Yeah, we're going to start at exactly 6:30, but it's good that we're both visible. Those people who are posting messages, can you hear me and Chad talking now? Great. Okay. Good. It's all working. I'll say this again after we've actually started, but how we're going to run this is we've never done one of these Zoom things before, and certainly, well, I think Chad is much more of an expert than I am, but I am a Zoom novice, and in order to do the questions, we've decided that the easiest way to do is if you could put your questions up on the chat, and then I'll read them out to Chad. We were practicing earlier with putting people on so that we could hear you, but I think it's probably simpler if we just do it like that. So I hope that's okay with everybody. How are we doing?
Sound okay, Catherine?
It sounds fine. People have putting our messages up on chat to say they can hear. So well, while we're waiting, maybe I could just tell you all a bit about 20th Century Society, because it's 20th Century Society that have organised today's event. And I know that lots of people who've signed up aren't members. Normally we run our events primarily for our members, but in these very strange circumstances, we're very keen to welcome other people as well. But our main raison d'etre is to preserve 20th century buildings. We campaign for listing of buildings from 1914 onwards, and then we talk to developers and property owners and architects and negotiate with them to make sure that the schemes they come up with for their change of use or continuing use are sympathetic to the architecture of the buildings. So we're basically a preservation organisation that does that. But we run a lot of events, and in better times we actually go out and physically look at buildings, of course. Including doing trips abroad. So over the next 2 Thursdays, we've got an evening of pictures from our trip to India at the end of last year and from our trip to Japan a couple of years ago. So you're very welcome to come back for either of those. But we'd also really, really love it if you could join 20th Century as a member and support our campaigning work. Okay, that's the
commercial
bit over. Thought I should use up the gap with the
mind the gap.
Yeah, you see, no one in London thinks that's funny. Everyone knows it's the thing that happens all the time. Okay, how are we doing for time?
We got 2 minutes. 1 minute.
I'm not very good at being patient. Chad is definitely in Miami, but that's actually a fake background.
It is it's a project of ours, but it doesn't look like that where I am right now. Although the view out is actually almost exactly like what I'm looking at right now. But we have a little bit of London weather today. It's a little overcast and a little stormy. So
are you on Miami Beach? Are you on Miami Beach, or are you in Miami proper?
I'm on Miami Beach, actually, yeah. And
looking west, or?
Right now I'm looking at the ocean east, yeah.
East.
I'm looking at, yeah. It almost looks exactly like that, with the same sky and everything, so.
Only if that's bad weather, I think you're doing okay.
It's not raining yet.
Yeah.
So I think we're at the right time. I don't know if we start the slideshow.
Yeah, I think we are probably good to go. So Chad's going to play a slideshow of images from the book, and also some projects that he's designed, inspired by some of the themes that the projects he's selected for the book share. And that's going to run, I think it only takes about 5 minutes to go right through it. So that's going to run behind us, isn't it? Or whilst you and I are talking.
Yeah. It'll just loop.
Keep looping.
You guys see everything okay, Catherine?
I can see fine.
Okay, great.
Yep, great.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Well, thank you ever so much, Chad, for doing this. As I said, I'm Catherine Croft. I'm Director of 20th Century Society. I'm here in London, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Chad, who is in Miami, where it's lunchtime. And Chad has just published a very handsome book called Lair, which is subtitled Radical Homes and Hideouts of Movie Villains. As I expect you already know, all of you, it's a very large format and very stylishly printed book with silver ink on black paper. And I think it's designed to look totally perfect on the coffee table, or maybe that should be the cocktail bar of today's most accomplished and design savvy villain. It's also available to ordinary humans via Amazon. So I hope some of you have managed to get hold of a copy, and that more of you will after this evening's talk. And I'm also expecting that our audience tonight includes film buffs, as well as our usual architectural enthusiasts. And Chad, you've definitely found a fabulous topic, and we felt it was one that would absolutely cheer everybody up and be perfect escapist fare while we're all in lockdown. So that's what's brought us all here tonight. So in the book, Chad looks in detail at 15 films, and in each case, it's the villain's lair, which is explored in detail, and it seems to be that really fascinates him. As well as stills from the films, there are some fabulous line drawings, as you're seeing right now on the screen, plans, sections, perspectives, and cutaways, showing how each place actually fits together. And there are interviews in the book with film directors and actors and art directors. So Chad himself is an architect. He's not originally from Florida. He studied architecture at Cornell in upstate New York, where it's snowy in the winter. And in 1999, he founded Oppenheim Architecture, which now has offices in Miami, New York, and Basel in Switzerland. And the practice has lots of international projects. It's won lots of international prizes. And you've got projects in, I think, over 25 countries now. You're currently building a luxury eco-resort in Wadi Rum, I saw, which made me really envious. I think that sounds a fantastic project. You clearly love Miami, and I'll ask you a bit later what took you there and what the effects of the architecture of Miami has had on your own architecture. And I'm kind of aware that Miami is a city where an awful lot of filming takes place, and I'm wondering whether maybe that's part of what's fed into this book. So you describe yourself in the book as an alchemist of atmosphere. So I really think it's great. So tonight we're going to ask you to talk about both real and imaginary places, the nature of villainy perhaps, and the architecture of both architects and set designers, what they've imagined for some of the nastiest people ever invented. So I think I said earlier, and I don't know how many people were already locked in, that we will have questions when Chad and I are going to talk for a bit, and then there'll be a chance for questions. Owing to my somewhat primitive grasp of the technology of Zoom, we're going to ask you if you could post your questions on the chat function, and then I'm going to read them out to Chad. I know it's potentially possible to get people to speak out their own questions, but I think that might be tempting fate with the technology on our very first Zoom event, so we'll stick to the basics. Anyway, my first question for Chad was, You have summed up your lairs as a really nice quote as being stunning, sophisticated, envy-inducing expressions of the warped drives and desires of their occupants. So I wanted to start by asking you to explain exactly how you made your selection. How did you draw up a short list of just 15 films?
Yeah, thank you, Kat. It was actually a really grueling process. So this book has been probably 30 years in the making. I've had this vision for a long time, and Trump Publishing really took the bull by the horns and wrestled this out of me. Obviously, you know, we're busy creating architecture, hard to create books as well. So it was a tremendous effort, 30 people working on it. And, you know, I guess the book kind of started when I was a kid, or the idea of the fascination with these layers, with watching, my father had showed me The Man with the Golden Gun. And that was my first James Bond film. And we were probably watching it on like Betamax or something. I didn't watch it in the cinema. And I just, you know, was blown away. And particularly interested in Scalamandra, who's the villain, his hideaway in these rocky cliff islands of Thailand, and how the architecture kind of inserted itself within this. And a lair is actually basically a hideaway for animals, typically, and we use it also for people as well. But the way that we were looking at this, and of course there are many others, and there might be a volume 2, is that we wanted the layers to be inspirational to us architecturally. They had something in them that I've always appreciated or have drawn on for my own inspiration in my work. And we also, most importantly, wanted them to be something that you would want to inhabit. You know, like for instance, Darth Vader has this fortress called Fortress Vader that's on this volcano planet that is really horrible atmosphere. So all these layers have like these incredible atmospheres that are in some ways aspirational for normal people to kind of be like, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to like live in this incredible, you know, island paradise and have this incredible architecture. So that was a really important aspect of the selection criteria. But, you know, it was a little bit idiosyncratic. It was very personal in what inspired me. And that was really the main rule.
Okay, but you also set yourself rules about the villains had to be nasty enough, I think. Is that right?
Definitely. And they had to also be like a proper villain. And, you know, like for instance, in the Big Lebowski, there's another incredible John Lautner home, that is the Sheets Goldstein house, which is probably one of my favorite houses of all times. And the character wasn't really, he was a bad guy because he dealt in like drugs and pornography and whatnot, but he wasn't like a villain doing really bad things. There are other houses where some of the villains were like just psycho killers and other things where we just like, that wasn't really like an interesting motive. But if you look at like someone like Carl Stromberg from The Spy Who Loved Me, a lot of these villains have, in a way, like, you know, our own villains and evil dictators, and you know, they have like a message, and you may not agree with it most of the time if you're sane, but you know, there's like a philosophy. So Carl Stromberg was like he felt like the world was kind of ruined, and he wanted to like give birth to a new world out of the water. So, you know, even someone like Lex Luthor from Superman, he had like a very big real estate transaction because he had bought all the land east of the San Andreas Fault, and he felt like if he can get rid of all the land to the west, he would do a great business in his investment. So you know, they had to have some sort of interesting characteristic quality. Another house that we were loving to include was Villa Malaparte or Casa Malaparte in Capri, which is another one of my most favorite architectural elements of the world. And he was just a bad husband in the movie Contempt. So, you know, that it had to have kind of the whole package to get in the book.
Great. or the opposite of great, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that really struck me is that you'll fix 15 examples all mixed up together. Some of them are shot in real houses. Some of them are totally done on set. Some of them are kind of splicing together of more than one place. Some of them are a bit of a building and a bit of a set. And you treat them visually in the book all the same. Why was that?
Well, you know, we're just going with the idea that, you know, playing along with the fantasy of these movies. But, you know, a lot of them have, you know, every movie is trying to evoke the sense of place, the sense of realism, as well as this sense that the lair reflects the personality of the villain. So it was important for us to give everything sort of equal footing, whether it be a painted backdrop like North by Northwest. The house was never even built. You know, funny story about that house, the Hitchcock film, is that Hitchcock actually wanted Frank Lloyd Wright to design the house. And he wanted to actually build the house on the back of Mount Rushmore. And Frank Lloyd Wright's fee was apparently like 1/10 of the budget of the film. And the Parks Commission were adamant that Hitchcock would not build the house in the back of Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just a movie painting, like a set painting, and the interiors were fabricated. So we just wanted to conceive and consider all these projects on equal footing and give them a sense of reality.
Yeah, I mean, your book definitely gives them all equal reality, doesn't it? They are all, you know, equally tangible, and the drawings that you've had done allow the reader to kind of follow the route around the different rooms within the lairs. The same way that you read. Can you say?
The drawings were a really big part of the process of kind of understanding and discovering. And Carlos Fueyo, who's an architect and works with the publishing team, he was able to kind of dive deep into these movie sets. Every drawing was actually not a drawing, it was a 3D model. So Carlos built, because he's also worked in Hollywood doing special effects, he built everything in 3D and then cut those models. And
but as a computer model, Chad, not as as a computer model rather than a physical balsa wood model.
Yeah, it's a 3D computer model. So he was using software that we use also in the office, Maya, which is used for a lot of special effects, as well as Unreal Engine, which is a gaming engine. Which is also something that we use architecturally to kind of uncover the atmospheric conditions of a place. So it was a very laborious and labor of love process for Carlos to kind of dive deep into all these you know, fantasy and real architectures and create this kind of equal kind of situation of understanding with all the properties.
Right. So potentially you've got those 3D models out there, and people could perhaps, you know, be allowed to do fly-throughs or take more.
We have some different strategies. We've been in talks with some production companies actually to do a series on the book, like a television series, as well as there's possibilities to kind of engage in VR experiences where you can fully immerse yourself in these villainous environments.
Right. But what about I mean, there are 4 projects that actually used John Lautner houses, aren't there?
Yes.
What is it about John Lautner's architecture that is so appealing to filmmakers? Why does he get equated with homes of villains? I'm sure some of those Lautner houses were commissioned by perfectly nice people, maybe.
Probably. So, well, first off, John Lautner has been a big influence for me as an architect, and strangely enough, I never heard of him or was taught about him in any architecture school. And I don't know if that's because he sort of had this more hedonistic approach to architecture, where it was about really romancing the site and coming up with these incredibly dramatic experiences for people. But I think that what happened, John Lautner did these homes at a time when, people were more familiar with, let's say, traditional houses. So if you're going to be creating the home of a villain, it has to be something, unless it's kind of the idea of the movie is, this kind of undercover, mundane existence where a serial killer might live. But typically they're trying to kind of celebrate a different way of thinking, a way that they are in some ways better or enlightened over normal mortals. So Lautner's work, really pushed the boundaries of domestic architecture. And in many ways, and he was a disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright, as some of you might know. But interestingly enough,
I was going to say, we had Murray Grigger, the Scottish filmmaker, came and showed his film about Lautner and took questions at 20 last year. It was really good. And I think, I've been to one of those Lautner houses and was completely bowled away by it.
I've been to the Sheets Goldstein house, and I got in there from the window company because we were doing a Lair for a very well-known movie director in Los Angeles, right in one of the other canyons in Bel Air, and we were going to use the same window company as Lautner had used on his home, and we ended up going to the house, and the owner, Goldstein, was sitting there with, and you can't make this stuff up, he was sitting there with one of those reflectors, one of those solar reflectors, getting a tan. Wow. So it's kind of I guess kind of something like an evil villain might do. He just was missing the Persian cat. But there's this otherworldly characteristic of pushing the boundaries of domestic architecture, of really immersing the projects within the site, or in the case of Bride De Palma's Body Double, elevating the Chemosphere house above the grounds, above the city of Los Angeles. I mean, here on the screen is the Elrod House in Palm Springs, and Diamonds Are Forever. But it was very sexy. The sets, they were very seductive, and they really provided an opportunity to express a unique characteristic of a villain. And I think that's why Lautner's work. But it's interesting because I think life imitates art and art imitates life. I think there was kind of a dialogue going back and forth between Lautner and Ken Adam, who was the production designer on many of the films. And quite frankly, we could have probably done a whole book on James Bond films, or on Lautner houses that were in films, or just Ken Adam. So we wanted
Ken
to
Adams, there've been exhibitions on Ken Adams' work, haven't there, specifically? He must be
he's kind of an unsung hero, like Lautner as well. He's just that guy was amazing.
But one of the things I thought was, kind of obvious when you think about it, but probably hadn't really registered with me before, was the comment in the book. For you have a quote from Roman Polanski, just pointing out that if you actually do try and film in a real house, you have enormous problems with continuity, just in terms of the way the sunlight comes through the room. And I mean, that struck me as, I mean, you know, it's very obvious when you think about it, but do you think that those are do you think that's one of the main reasons why people prefer to use sets? I mean, I'm just wondering in terms of kind of cost, which, you know, must be enormously expensive to do some of these very elaborate sets.
Yeah, yeah. You know, yeah, some of them, I mean, just some kind of side trivia that you can find in the book, Blofield's volcano in the You Only Live Twice, the Bond film, which is also Ken Adam, that was the most expensive set ever built at the time. I believe it was like $1 million, but when $1 million actually was a lot of movie money.
Yeah.
And it was a life-size set. I mean, it was like this huge size of diameter of a football field. So yeah, I think that, you know, I've actually had the opportunity to work with a bunch of movie directors and have been on sets. And, you know, one of the movie directors that I'm a huge fan of and who's a friend of ours, and actually Sir Richard Rogers and Ruthie Rogers actually introduced me to him, is the movie director Michael Mann. And I've been on set with him. He used our own house that we live in Miami as a set. And it's just amazing because the amount of manipulation, he actually built like walls and moved our kitchen and built like a fake kitchen just to get like a 30-second scene. So, you know, I think what's so fascinating is that these production designers and the directors, when you really dive into this, and you could read a lot about it in the book, and frankly, you know, I just had this idea of the layers. I didn't, you know, like I wasn't studied in it. I, you know, was interested in John Lautner and James Bond films, and many films from Star Wars and Blade Runner have been influential to me, because you're kind of a creature of your own experiences, and that's how we kind of push forward our thinking from the things that inspire us. But you know, it's fascinating to dive into the stories and the thinking and how they really are all very much considering these villains like clients of like, what would they need and what would they want and what would be the music they're listening to and what's the art on the wall. And you know, Ken Adams was really, really brilliant. He had this interesting ability to take these very kind of brutalist type of architecture of concrete, these very powerful, and then mix it with and juxtapose it with this kind of elements of domesticity. You know, so like in some ways, like some of the furniture like reminded me of like, you know, my grandmother's like house, you know, like the lamps and the sofas, and yet it's in this like incredible, you know, place. And even in Atlantis, which was Carl Stromberg from The Spy Who Loved Me, he had this incredible anthropomorphic structure that emerged out of the water, and yet on the inside, it was like Downton Abbey. You know, it was really
because talented architects design the lairs and tasteless villains fit them out.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. You know,
yeah. Sorry, I'm talking across you.
He had all these crazy things like oil paintings and you know, the most kind of you know, excuse my language, but the most badass thing, I guess, is being underwater and having a fireplace, like a real fireplace. Like, you know, that's like, wow, you know, how do you do that? But, you know, so there is this very interesting mix about what is reality, what is existing, and what is fictitious. And I think what's another little anecdote that we uncovered when we were doing the book was that in Dr. Strangelove, which was probably Ken Adam, like tour de force, and it influenced so many people, completely fabricated set, supposed to be in the Pentagon. It's the war room. And, you know, here's life imitating art and art imitating life. When cinema's first president, Ronald Reagan, got into the White House, he said when they were bringing him to the Pentagon, you know, bring me to the war room.
Yeah.
And they brought him to this, you know, crappy little place. He's like, no, bring me to the war room.
I want the room with the big table and the...
Yeah, I want like the big sloping roof and the high gloss floor. And he was like, apparently like really surprised that that wasn't the war room. And the war room itself was actually some really like hunky little bunker type place. So it's kind of interesting little tidbits that you can kind of uncover in all these essays.
But some of the more recent of these films, I think, are kind of reacting against that kind of sense of money buys you, you know, space and ostentation, and you know, kind of re-envisaging what a villain might want as perhaps sort of more something to do with privacy and exclusivity and almost anonymity, really. Is that something that you found through doing this work?
Yeah, I think, you know, the movie that kind of reflects that would be the Ex Machina.
Yeah.
And which, if any of you have not seen it, unbelievable movie, unbelievable writing, directing, architecture, casting, just really incredible story, everything. But essentially, that villain is this mixture of sort of, they call him like Mark Zuckerberg with a six-pack, because he's kind of working out a lot. And essentially, you know, he's like this elusive tech multi-billionaire, and his lair is supposed to be in Alaska. And what's fascinating about that, which is really true to what a lair is that it's hidden, it's discreet, it's almost invisible. And I think one of the interesting quotes, and I won't do it verbatim, is that when Khalib is like, who the guy who works for him, who's coming to test out the AI unknowingly, he's like, when are we getting there? And they're in this helicopter. He's like, oh, we've been flying over it for 2 hours, you know? So it's like this idea of nature, of hiding within nature. And a lot of the villains' lairs that we love and the architecture that we love and is hidden, is discreet within these natural environments. And, you know, I think that's like the ultimate sort of power play is, you know, at least considering it these times, is that kind of discretion, that kind of immersion within landscape, within nature, letting nature be the star. And it's certainly kind of the main motive, even this project that's on the screen now, like nature is kind of taking over the villa, and, you know, nature is framing, or the villas are framing how nature really goes on to be this incredible power. And I think today, you know, we're really, you know, getting connected again. I think, like, you know, this time has been really difficult. And for those who can go out, I think there's really a greater appreciation for the beauty that we might take for granted.
Yeah, I think that's true. Even within very urban locations, there's a lot of focus on the nature that you can find on your doorstep. And
definitely.
Yeah. I had one other question for you, which was,
you can have as many as you want. I have nowhere to go.
I don't think we're going to go and see what other questions we've got out there. But one thing I really was struck by is what a masculine world this is. All your villains are a male, and I think there's just one production designer in the whole lot who's a woman, and the rest of it, it's a man's world. And I wondered what you thought. Well, two questions really. One, what you thought a female villain might want, whether that would look very different. With, you know, would a woman's lair be totally different? And what about if we had a female director doing one of these films? Do you think we'd get a different result?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. By no means it was the selection criteria, but I would say that I grew up thinking the women in my life could do no wrong, so they certainly couldn't be villains of any stretch of the imagination, from childhood to to today. So there was one movie villain, besides like the Ice Witch in like the Lion
There's a Veil, and that's about it. There aren't many out there.
In Narnia, and we were looking at that ice palace at one point, but once again, it was not necessarily like the criteria. It'd be nice to like inhabit it for maybe a night, like an ice hotel, but not stay there forever. One of the other villains that we were looking at was Demi Moore in Charlie's Angels. I think 2 or 3. And we also tried to make sure that the movies were good movies, like not that that's like a bad movie, but some sort of cinematic relevance, if you will. And by no means I'm a screen buff and know everything about all films, but she was a pretty bad villain and interesting character, but she didn't really have like a proper lair. Although they did use the Chemisphere house in that, but it wasn't her house. It was like her villainous partner, and we just thought body double would be a better use of that. But yeah, so I don't know what it would look like, but you're right. I mean, these are mostly like bachelor pads. They're very macho. They're all about kind of impressing the people who come there. And showing their sort of bravado and their power, and demonstrating the power and the kind of thinking that they might have. One of the things that was discussed at some of the different panel discussions that we've had throughout the United States on this is that many of them are not baby-proofed. Like not a good place. Yeah, not a good place to raise a family. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thought, and there's always volume 2. So everyone should send in their favorite villainous women and directors and production designers. So very interesting topic.
And do you think? I mean, and on the whole, villains inhabit modern architecture, don't they? In your world, do you think? I mean, the kind of associations that American audiences have with modernism are perhaps quite different to what we have here in the UK. For us, modern architecture is quite largely the architecture of the post-war, social housing and hospitals and schools, whereas I think in the States it's the world of big business and big money. Do you think that's reflected in what we're seeing here?
I think that's a really interesting question, and one of the thoughts about the criteria that there are, obviously, even going back to like Dracula's castle, right? Like probably one of the original evil villains. Well, I don't know if villain, but evil monsters or what have you. The idea was for us that not that it had to be modern, it had to be interesting and inspirational architecturally to us. And I draw a lot of inspiration from classical architecture, and I don't really consider styles in our work. For me, it's just all about kind of universal notions of proportion and scale, and just creating something that is of its place and is sensitive to its climatic conditions. But yeah, I definitely think that modern architecture in the States is very different from the UK. And obviously there are some high-end, very modernistic, like One Hyde Park and the other Richard Rogers residential project behind the Tate. I forget the name of that as well. So, but yeah, there really is this interesting aspirational quality to a lot of the architecture in the film, in the book and in these films. And, you know, I think interestingly enough, like you see this happening here in Miami Beach, you know, there would be these cycles. So in the beginning, the architecture that came here was Mediterranean revival. Mm-hmm. So you had, you know, in the 20s, you had a lot of architecture that was inspired by Spain and mostly Spain, and perhaps Italy and a little bit of different places around the Mediterranean. But that was the architectural style. And then you saw sort of Art Deco and those types of houses. Then little by little, you kind of went to like bad versions of Mediterranean architecture, Mediterranean revival, you know, Federalist architecture. You know, there was a lot of kind of different thinkings. And every once in a while, you would get a modernist house. And, you know, like Morris Lapidus did like one kind of really cool house on the bay, but not many modern houses. Then you would see, like in Miami Vice, there was, and that's how I ended up in Miami, actually.
I was going to ask you, yeah.
Yeah, I watched a lot of Miami Vice, and I grew up in central New Jersey. And for me, like watching Miami Vice, once again with my father.
I think you need to explain what Miami Vice was, because I know that none of our viewers under 40 will know.
No, really? Oh my God!
I tried it out on a couple of people, and they had no. That was my first kind of image of Miami was definitely through Miami Vice.
Yeah, for me as well. I mean, when I was born, my father's parents moved to West Palm Beach, which is not as alluring as Miami. And so my experience with Florida before I moved here was basically like an old age home and Disney World. And I guess Miami Beach was a place in the beginning, or not, it was kind of the playground, you know, for a lot of things happening, you know, post-Depression, World War II. And, you know, Miami Vice was a Michael Mann TV show in the 80s, and was a detective cop show, two detectives, Crockett and Tubbs. But it was, I would say it was revolutionary for television. And, you know, the thinking about architecture, about fashion, music, cars, boats, you know, growing up in central New Jersey and getting into that world every Friday night was like a real fantasy experience. So, you know, it was interesting for me when Michael came to Miami to film the movie, which I still believe the TV show is much better than the movie. But so start with the TV show if you're interested in it. And Michael had said, which was like probably one of the biggest highlights of my career. He's like, you know, your work represents the new Miami. And, you know, this is like Jersey boy, you know, moving to Miami after watching Miami Vice and having the creator of Miami Vice tell us that our work, you know, represents the new Miami was a really, really big.
That's not bad. Yeah. I remember I actually just watched the theme tune again, you know, to remind myself about it yesterday. And I remembered, I mean, it has sort of flamingos and girls in bikinis and all that stuff. But what I'd remembered was that it showed the Arquitectonica building with the big cutout and the palm tree in it. And I kind of remembered that as being, you know, a major part of the theme tune. And in fact, it's like there for half a second, and then it disappears.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
yeah, funny enough, yeah, I ended up moving to Miami and worked with Arquitectonica because of that. So I worked there. That's when I moved down here. The next day I started working for them and designing a lot of buildings, and then went out on my own 5 years later. So you know, that the building's called the Atlantis.
Yeah.
And really inspiring building. Some people say that Rem Koolhaas and Delirious New York might have played a big part in some of those earlier projects because there was a relationship there amongst the principals with Rem.
Right.
Was actually Lorinda Bernardo's partner, a wife. It was her professor when she was at Columbia. So if you look at like Delirious New York, there's kind of a lot of interesting references to a lot of that work, which is really quite powerful. But yeah, I ended up there because of that, and I also ended up looking probably like a really big fool wearing Miami Vice clothing to my 8th grade graduation.
I just put up on the chat thing that you had a peach-colored blazer in college.
Who said that?
I can't tell. I literally can't tell. Anyway, your secret's out.
That was amongst other things. So yeah, that was. I had this Miami Vice phase, wearing these loose-fitting blazers and T-shirts and espadrilles and loose pants, in central New Jersey, and I was the tallest person in our class, so I walked first down the aisle looking like a complete lunatic, but nevertheless, I guess it made something.
Seriously, I think one of the things that was interesting about Miami Vice is one of the things that's been credited with kind of helping to kickstart the revival of all the Art Deco architecture in South Beach, isn't it? That it was
definitely
that's on an international stage. So yes,
and what's really interesting about it, it's like always the villains lived in the cool houses, right? And in like James Bond is essentially homeless, right? And all the villains have all the great houses. I mean, he had Skyfall, which he blew up in one of the last films, Skyfall. And he blew up his heritage house, but most of the good guys, like Miami Vice, Crockett, lived on a sailboat, so typically like the good guys, and I think like that's one of the devices that these movie and TV directors they use is that in a way, like you see in Star Wars. The Empire has like all the best architecture, all the best equipment, besides the Ewoks in their village, which was kind of cool in the forest, there's all the villains have like the best machinery, and it makes the sort of protagonist, the underdog, which I believe gives some tension to the conquest and to the sort of arc of the story.
Yes, I mean the good guys don't have the good houses, and they never even get them in the end. I tell you, the one thing I was when I first went to LA, I kind of assumed that LA was absolutely stuffed with modern houses. I thought it was all Lautners and Neutra houses, and non-stop, because those are the ones that we see published in the UK. And obviously it's not. They're kind of little jewels amongst a lot more reproduction buildings, and a lot of
Mediterranean, a lot of Spanish Mediterranean, and but LA really was a tremendous testing ground for modern architecture, and because it was sort of so new and about kind of moving out west and exploring the possibilities, and the climate provided a tremendous opportunity to sort of push those boundaries of domesticity from a lot of people coming from Europe, like Schindler and Neutra, and then even people from the United States like Frank Lloyd Wright did a lot of really interesting homes, like the Enos House. And it was, and that's how I guess Lautner kind of got to California, or just prominence from his working with Wright. I believe if I'm not mistaken, he ran the LA site, the projects for Wright in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of other types of houses. So this is one of the houses that we've done in LA for the movie director Michael Bay. And for us, this was a really interesting time to kind of consider Los Angeles today, consider what's important for us architecturally, and push those boundaries of domesticity even further. That's like a 40-foot door. This is a subterranean garage entered through like a cave that exists under a pond. And then here you can see the house over the over the city of Los Angeles. So it's fun to work and think with creative people and push the boundaries. And for us, our work is really all about our clients, the site, and how we can harmonize the two and enhance how people live. And we like to think all of our clients are benevolent and good.
Even the filthy rich ones.
Yeah.
I've just seen what time it is, and I think we ought to take some questions, if that's okay with you. Yeah. Sure. A lot of people have just been commenting and sparking off one another, but I'm just kind of going through this now. There's a question here from Jamie who says, it's interesting to see a colour change. Ex Machina's photograph of the faces on the wall is a colour photograph, but once you change it into black and white, it could easily transition into any other of the layers. Do you feel interchangeability is a key factor to the essence of a layer? And also, I'd kind of like you to maybe just talk a bit about your decision to do the whole book not in colour. It's all in silver ink printed on black paper.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and maybe I'll kind of get to it through that point. Once again, it was really about of kind of unifying everything so that you would see it without different qualities of film, because different films were shot at different times, and also how we can kind of make it more not just about the pictures of the book, but about the drawings and about the kind of undercover things that you've never seen before. These spaces from different angles, writing. But we also were inspired by the sort of silver tone qualities of film. And, and this is very much a highly tactile book. And it's a really beautiful book. Probably costs more than it sells for. So, it's a really great consideration has gone into the graphics and the graphic design and the printing and really celebrating the art of bookmaking and the analog qualities of that in a digital world. So, but that idea of black and white, of really giving equality to everything and almost thinking about it in this kind of neutral understanding of everything giving weight. It was because all the movies have like different light qualities and color renditions, and we didn't want it to really be about that, but more about kind of the placemaking and the right. kind of villains, and we wanted to have that sort of cinematic quality.
Yeah, I mean, because a film like Body Double is kind of incredibly strong on the color, isn't it? It's really about kind of those pinks and oranges, and and it does create there are actually, most people have been chatting to one another to us rather than actually specifically asking questions. I'm
glad everyone's communicating.
But there's one specific question, which is, Chad, did you wear your jackets with the sleeves rolled up in the 80s? Which is another Miami Vice question, which I think you need to answer.
I'm wearing it rolled up right now. Yeah.
And then I think before
this is my Miami Vice 2020 look.
Yeah, it's not quite the same. Lovely, but okay. But before we go, can I ask you the big question, obviously, which is which of these 15 houses, lairs, if you had to be holed up for the entire period of lockdown in one of them, which one would you pick?
Yeah, I think your first is always the most important, and that would have to be Scalamandra's lair in Thailand, in in the Man with the Golden Gun.
Holland out island. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, because of that movie, that area has been kind of overpopulated, and I think they've even stopped recently allowing people to go there, not because of the virus, but because it was just getting overrun. And so I would like it as it existed before James Bond went there and kind of ruined the Hideout vibe. But that would be a pretty good place. But this whole virus pandemic, it's almost like a movie villain had come up with this strategy. So it's kind of a crazy time, and it's nice to be able to kind of speak about these fantasy worlds, and I really appreciate you taking the time and inviting me to talk about the book. And it was arduous, and tremendous energy went into it, but we hope people enjoy it and see things that they've never seen before.
Great. Well, thank you enormously. I mean, it's been great fun for me. Both reading the book and revisiting some of those films has been a great pleasure. And thank you so much for sharing it with us. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Before everyone else goes, can I have one last plea that if you aren't a member of 20th Century Society, and you've enjoyed this evening, please come back and join us for the next 2 Thursdays when we're going to revisit our trips to India and to Japan. And it would be fantastic if some of you would consider joining us. We're a building preservation organisation, and we do a lot of campaigning, and we rely on our members' subs to actually fund that work. So it would be great to have some new members. Thanks very much, and I hope everyone enjoyed that. Bye-bye.